Okay, my phone says it's 5 o'clock. So I will call this meeting of the Port of Hood River Commission to order. Are there any modifications or additions to the agenda, Michael?
President Shepherd, there are two. First, Commissioner Fox pointed out that in the meeting minutes that are in your packet, second page, section 8 under action items, both action item A and action item B have a note under vote that says none. And in fact, that was just an error in preparation. So that should say approved unanimous for each one of those two items. And thanks to Commissioner Fox for pointing those out. So staff would recommend you approve the minutes with those changes and any other that you have. And then second, the executive session citation was incorrect. It should be 192-660-2F, which is information exempt by law from public inspection.
Okay.
Finally, I just wanted to say thank you to Genevieve for coming in on her vacation move week to help get this meeting set up. That's it from staff.
All right, was there any, I didn't receive any from commission. Was there any public comment received today, or is anyone present?
Wait a minute, I've got one. And the issue here is we need to give some feedback to John Hardum, I believe is his name, on this potential presentation of that group to the port. I don't believe we've gotten back to him yet.
Yeah, I've been emailing with John, and he will be on the October 5th agenda, and he will give his presentation during public comment, and he'll be joined by Mark Steigner, I believe. So they're excited to present their idea.
Great, thank you for doing that. I just wanted to close that loop.
Yep,
Thank
we're
you.
all set.
Was there any public comment received?
None
For
received.
staff from this end.
Great. Then I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda with the noted changes that Michael mentioned.
I'll make the motion to approve the meeting notes as adjusted during the session here.
Strykel second.
All right, moved and seconded. All in favor, please remember, say your name.
Aye, Mike Fox.
Garing, aye.
Strike aye.
Is this for consent agenda? I'm sorry, I was just jumping on. I'm having video problems.
Yes, it is.
Okay, Chapman, aye.
All right, Shepherd, aye as well. Consent agenda is passed. I think we can move directly to our presentations this evening. Greg, I believe you're first with aviation tracking technology.
Good evening, everyone. So the AACs continue to investigate methods of capturing airport data. After reviewing two rather robust programs, Vector Airport Systems and Invictus Global Services, both priced around $50,000 to $60,000, and discussing those pros and cons, it was suggested that perhaps the port might explore a less expensive approach by utilizing FlightAware data. FlightAware being a flight tracking program commonly used among pilots and aircraft enthusiasts. All three of these programs rely on ADS-B transponder data for flight tracking information, just so you know. So the port purchased a year of historic data so we can get an analysis of what that program could provide. Data set provided tail numbers, types of aircraft, owner name, locations, origin, destination, departure, and arrival. Good stuff. But understanding there's several aircraft at the airport without ADS-B transponders, AHCC Chair Dave Cobble suggested that perhaps the port combine FlightAware data with a simple game camera positioned in a taxi lane. The visual record of each aircraft using the taxi lane in conjunction with the FlightAware data can theoretically capture the total number of aircraft using the airfield at a minimum. AAC Chair Dave Cobble and also AAC participant Chris Roebuck volunteered to conduct a year-long analysis of the visual and digital data to portray the total number of aircraft taking off and landing. Once complete, this year-long study can then be reviewed to assess if sufficient for the port's needs or not. That's the essential gist of that memo.
So Greg,
Yes, sir.
this is Mike Fox. So what are we trying to use this information for? The number of landings, the number of takeoffs? You know, collecting the data is one thing, but what are we going to use it for?
That's a very valid question. And I think if you asked 5 individuals, you get 5 different answers. I think as the port looks at it, you can look at future planning as far as how we should develop our airport. If we know general usage rates, and also whether we have private or commercial aircraft that are using it more predominantly, we can kind of generate our future outlook to whatever is receptive to that, so we can help grow. And yeah, that's the essential basis. But again, I think it starts with just capturing basic data. Let's get a baseline of our usage rates, and that's the ultimate goal from the start.
The issue that I have was the cheaper route, which putting a hunting camera down on the end of the runway means somebody's going to have to go through that camera manually and add up all of this information. And I just question if we don't have a use for it. In other words, if it was part of the game plan that we're going to develop landing tolls or takeoff tolls, I get it. If it's, would just like to understand more strategically, what are we trying to do here? It's nice to have information, but it's nice to have lots of different information. But if we're not going to use it for anything, why are we doing it? And I'm not against it. I'd rather us think about how can we use this, and especially with the issue of trying to get the airport to cost neutral, how can we use this information to help us get there?
Valid. I honestly, prior to me coming on, the port decided it was goal number 6 of the strategic business plan, that they were going to look at how to evaluate and consider new technologies that can provide useful data for airport operations and area impacts. So there's already water under the bridge once I jumped in the boat, but I concur. Having a specific goal in mind is going to help us refine what the data we need is. The programs that were looked at previously are kind of pricey without really knowing what we want the data for. So this was thought as a low-cost option. Chairman of the ACC, Dave Cobble, has volunteered to spearhead the charge on this exercise. And ultimately, it was born out of the necessity to capture non-ADS-B aircraft, which, quite honestly, our airfield has quite a few. Ultimately, it's up to the commission to decide what we want to use this information for, whether it's valid, whether it's necessary or not. But there has been a large push to gather information. That's been the impetus for this exercise.
Yeah, and frankly, I was one of them that was pushing for what's the raw data that we've got. But at the same time, we're under I understand the finances pretty well now of where we are on the port. I'm very concerned about spending money with uncertainty of, are we going to get any rate of return? And so I would rather we think about how do we want to use information to make a change, then we decide what information do we need.
It's fair.
Greg, Commissioner Strike, is there any way we can incorporate this camera system into a security system for the airport and justify it that way? Incorporate both of them?
I think that it would be a stretch of the resource, of the volunteered resource of the human component who's willing to go through the day-to-day taxi lane visual data and correlate that to flight aware data. Now we're talking about a $300 game camera, so it's minimal cost. It's more man hours that have willfully given to the port to help us gather this information. I think that supersedes the capabilities that we're talking about at this point, as far as security.
So what you're saying is the cost
Greg,
would be closer to $300 instead of $60,000, and the time to compile the data has been volunteered by the AAC. So the port's spend would not include staff hours, and so it'd be fairly inexpensive.
That's correct.
That seems like incredibly cheap information.
but I still agree with Mike. I'm not sure why we're doing this. You haven't given me a good answer why we're really doing this. How are we going to benefit from this? Because we can go ahead and utilize the FBO in identifying commercial and GA landings and takeoffs. They're giving us a monthly report now. So why don't we utilize what the source we have there now to get the information we're trying to get? Because I'm still not following why we're having this information. What's it going to tell me?
That's correct.
Chime in just for a quick sec. You know, in the context of the strategic business plan chapter that Greg mentioned, this technology was desired really within the context of noise complaints. And so there really is a policy question there on whether or not, if you receive a noise complaint with a certain date and time, do you want us to spend the time looking through that game video to figure out who was flying it? Then there's sort of a privacy question there. And that's kind of the pathway that might lead down in daily operations.
Well,
I have a
I
question.
agree with that. I think that's a great.
Go ahead, Hobie.
You know, I think it's a great tool. That makes sense to me. If we have a complaint, we go back and we have it on video and we identify it and address it. But that also can be rolled into a security situation and justify that purchase of cameras. And if they contact the port, you go back and you just look at the video, and that's under security for the whole airport. And you get an N number, you get a time when they take off and depart, everything you need. But it's on demand when you need it done and looked at. Not every day everybody looks at that video.
I have a question, Greg. I understand it's not required for our airport to have the ADS-B transponders. So what's the percentage of airplanes that have this technology? And also, you know, to kind of echo what Mike and Hobie are saying, like, you know, do we want to address a complaint of wanting to know who's using the airport? Because I mean, it does seem like a lot of volunteer hours are going to have to go into this project, and it sounds like the reports from both Vector and Invictus could be more of a full-fledged security system like Commissioner Strike is talking about.
Well, to answer your first question, we don't know how many aircraft are on the airfield that don't have ADS-B transponders. That was part of the exercise in taking free FlightAware data and how can we correlate that with some sort of visual so we can track day-to-day ops and actually capture the number beyond what FlightAware is showing. When we were looking at the historical data that we purchased just to look at what type of data would this give us, we noticed that there were no WAM aircraft noted at all. So that gives an indication of a large portion of the based aircraft do not have ADS-B transponders. And while it is an FAA requirement, there is no policing of it. So there's a difficult path to force pilots to adhere to that. That's kind of out of our jurisdiction. With regard to the others, there is, and I'm drawing a blank which one actually has the stationary cameras between Invictus and Vector. They still rely on ADS-B as well, and so they're going to have a similar component, but I guess there would be the plus of the security aspects with overall cameras for the airfield. It's whether $60,000 is worth that, or whether we can actually have our own security system for less cost, and we can capture what our base data might be for operations. And I just think back to my very first commission meeting, and it seemed that there was a lot of emphasis on capturing how many aircraft land and how many aircraft take off. And so that was the motivation to acquire this data in the first place. Obviously, there was motivation prior to me coming on board, but looking for an inexpensive way to provide that, provide a solution. That's kind of how this paired down.
And again, I was one of the folks that really pushed to get some raw data, but I think we need to step up a little bit. And maybe this goes back to the airport working group. How would we use this information to do something with? It's nice to have information, but it's kind of a waste if we're not going to use it for anything. So what are the potential uses for it? And fine.
Yeah, I think, again, if you asked 5 different individuals in that meeting, you'd get 5 different answers. But I think from the port's perspective, utilizing it for having a good knowledge of who is actually using our airport. We've got some estimated numbers from the FBO, and they're great, but they are using FlightAware data. So we know that there's a chunk that's not captured. Do we feel it's necessary to capture that in order for us to gain a full scope for long-range master planning for the airport? That would be a question I guess I would pose to the commission as you think about the necessity for this information. But your question is astute, and there were individuals in the meeting that asked the very same question.
My biggest concern, Commissioner Strike, my biggest concern is that I want to be able to address an issue that a constituent has brought to our attention or our staff and have documentation to enforce that to the fullest. That's what I want. The numbers, unless Genevieve's telling me that we have to have certain takeoff and landings in order to qualify for a certain grant or something, the takeoff and landings is not that vital of information. I want it to be secure, safe, and accountable.
So I have a question. What are the security issues that we're talking about, and what are you enforcing? I thought it was just generally for informational purposes, and from the first commission meeting I was at, it was generally the 2 new commissioners were just wondering, like Commissioner Fox said, how many airplanes are coming and going? We have no idea. And so it was basically just looking for some general information. What are you looking to use the word enforce a couple times? Enforce what?
You talking to Mr. Strike, Heather?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, my point is for security, if you have somebody walking their dog on the grass runway, that's a factor. You know, I want to be able to identify the individual, what time they did it, and address it. Those are my biggest concerns, as far as, and to be able to enforce something, to have a live video cam footage is great testimony in court.
This is a very large expansion of the discussion that I think staff was prepared to have. So are you suggesting that instead of this very basic and inexpensive tracking of takeoffs and landings, that you want to have a larger discussion on a comprehensive security system and plan for the airport?
Well, I think it boils down to, again, what do we see as our airport? Are we the type of airport that has a game cam that watches the takeoff and landings, or are we an airport that is invested in a total system that not only tracks the airplanes coming in and out, but also what's happening on the grounds of the airport at all times?
I think that goes back to what are we doing with the information?
Right.
And if I may jump in, this was a 1-year exercise. This would not be a continuing circumstance where we'd have an individual track throughout. This was a tracking from 365 days on, just to get a data set and get a good assessment of the total number of aircraft that come through our airfield.
And you've already purchased the FlightAware for the 585?
No, so the FlightAware data, that's a historic data. Yes, we purchased that so we could see what it actually gave us. Would it give us a year of information? But once we started to scratch through it, we noticed that there were a lot of aircraft that weren't on there, specifically WAM. And we know that's a large component. So we can then assume that there's a large percentage of our aircraft that don't have ADS-B transponders. So then we were stuck looking at how can we capture that, and what's our least cost option, what's our most cost, or a more expensive option. And yes, the two services that we looked into, they provide continuing services to the tune of $50,000 to $60,000 a year. So it really does come down to what information do we want, and what are we going to use it for? I think that's a very valid question.
So let me just jump in a little bit more here. So if we're looking at getting 1 year worth of data, that kind of makes some sense. And then that allows us to hold some other discussions like, and I know some people are not going to like this, but landing and takeoff fees. We could take a look at, and I don't know if you can get this, what's the mean time average for the airplane being on the ground? Is it touch and go? In other words, is it here just to refuel and take off, or are they here for 3 or 4 days? So they're going to need tie down space, or eventually, hangar space and that kind of stuff. So having that kind of information over a year period, yeah, maybe makes some sense. You can start to see a trend that you could, if you're looking for revenue streams, you could start talking about volume. Here's what it could mean to you. So if we've got some folks that are willing to look at this camera free of charge to us and capture this data for a year, makes sense. It's not that expensive. When you start talking about security, that's a whole nother enchilada that I think, Hobie, we got to talk more about, because now you're talking about lots of cameras all over the place, I would think. My 2 cents.
Commissioner Fox, if I could just dovetail off what you said about the length of stay, I think that's a very valid point as well, because then we get an indication of whether we're getting tourism dollars coming into our community via our airport. Are people coming in and staying for a length of time, spending their money in the local businesses? Are they staying in hotels? Are they just coming to have the $100 burger? And I think those types of assessments of how our airport can best serve our community, it benefits to have at least a knowledge to an extent on what type of aircraft, when I say what type, commercial or private, and how long they're staying.
So the data that you're going to collect, will it tell us how long they're staying?
I don't think so. No, it's going to give us the numbers because, well, granted, I suppose if they're capturing it, taking off and landing, we can then extrapolate how long the aircraft stayed. But beyond that, this is a basic brushstroke to get started and see if the data suffice. If it doesn't, then the thought is, do we need to relook at something that's a little more robust again?
Greg, let me, if I could just add that one way to get at that question is to determine, and we think we can from the data, whether an aircraft is a transit aircraft or a based aircraft. So if it's a based aircraft, it's in a hangar, it comes from this airfield, returns to this airfield. If it's transient, at least we have a tranche of those planes that are not based at this airfield, and so they would much more likely to be recreational type aircraft or commercial.
I think I would be okay with this route. I like the idea, but I understand it's significantly more expensive of having a more automated system that we can just aggregate data and pull data instead of relying on an individual human to do it, to track it. But the cost is incredibly different. I just would like for us, if we're going to go this route with a game cam and this FlightAware data, that we definitely check back in maybe in 6 months and see if it's working well, or it might tell us that we need something more robust at that time.
I would just put a challenge. I agree with what you just said, Christy. I think we need to put a challenge back on the airport committee to come up with some recommendations of how to use the data that's being collected. If they can't come up with it in 6 months, then why are we doing it? And if they do come up with something that's really good, then maybe we make the investment to go to the next level.
I thought the whole reason they were looking to get that data is because the commission requested it. So we're probably the ones that need to come up with the reason for gathering the data.
Well, I would offer up, and again, I would offer up to the commission or to the working group. You know, we're in a financial issue here, and we've got to come up with ways of making that airport cost neutral. I think that could be a source of information, that working group, to come up with those ideas. Now, this is a little bit off topic, but you're using data that we're collecting to help you make those kinds of recommendations.
Just for a
This
quick,
is something requested. No, that's fine. This is something we requested, and now we're getting extremely off a little bit on things that staff's not planned for. If we want to reconsider what we requested, then we need to do that at a planning meeting or something else where we request some information from staff. If we want to start collecting the information that we requested that they do, and then request that the AAC starts kind of formulating some ideas on how we're going to specifically use this, and we want to spend a little bit of money, fine. If we want to wait until we get those ideas and then decide if we spend a little bit of money, fine. But any larger discussion than that needs to be tabled now until a planning session, so we can get the information we need and give staff some time to do so.
Well, and the other thing too is the purchase of a game cam. I mean, we can use it for this project now and it would be ours, and we could use it for other things down the road. So for the amount of money that they're talking about, I think it's a good start. And then I think I agree with Ben that we need to kind of fine tune of what answers do we want to find, and fine tune it and work with the committee to come up with what they want to look for.
And kicking that to AAC is a good idea. They should make that recommendation to us. What else?
So it sounds like we're giving
Shepherd.
direction to move forward with the camera for now, but I do think we should check in with it. You know, maybe have monthly reports from the AAC volunteers who are aggregating it to see if it's useful or a success or not.
And why don't we add to, I don't know if it's appropriate for planning and or for budget, but there does seem to be enough interest on the commission in looking into a more comprehensive and proper security and tracking system out there that I think it should be added to the next appropriate time that we're going to talk about that kind of stuff, which is probably planning. And that way staff will have some time to look into that, and we'll be, by that time, perhaps get a little bit of data coming our way and some ideas of what we want to use it for to better inform our decision. Fair enough. I'm sorry. I was on the screen where I was just seeing one commissioner. Is that okay? Is that okay with everyone? Okay. Well, I can't see everybody, so I'm just gonna assume that the answer is yes if you don't see each other. So, Michael, does that sound doable for staff?
Yeah, I couldn't tell either whether each of the commissioners were supportive of that. It would
Get this
help.
agenda off the screen, that would be helpful so I can see commissioners. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Strike, is that okay with you? So compromise and then we can move forward?
Yeah, it is. And also too, Michael, is it possible to have a meeting with the FBO operator and try to incorporate their eyes on the field to help us in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as part of my report, I was going to say that the FBO reached out and extended an invitation to have each or all commissioners come up and visit and have a discussion about what they see at the airport, and this could be included in that.
Sounds good. All right, Greg, go ahead with that and then we'll hear more.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, Michael, we are next with some Anchor Way and North First Street conceptual engineering.
Yeah, so I've got a lengthy presentation here, and I've done this really for the benefit of our two new commissioners, Fox and Gearing. I'm going to go really quickly through the front end of this so you can see the flow of what the last 12 years or so. And then, but the point of this is to bring the commission up to date on where we are with the conceptual engineering and the grant funding request process for the Lot 1 infrastructure. So again, I can always brief commissioners on this individually, but I wanted to just show you the flow of information. Next. This is 2006 where we started. You don't see Waterfront Park, you don't see Second. You just see a lot of empty property. That's where the commission began back in '06. Next. We started out with a process where instead of a master plan, there'd been multiple master plans prepared, but the commission stepped back and tried to identify what the values are for the waterfront, what people really want to see, and start with their values and then demonstrate those values first and foremost in sort of a concept diagram. You can see here this hatched area on the right is Lot 1 development. And if you look closely, you can see that that's was identified as a study area. We always knew Lot 1 was very challenging and highly uncertain. Next. That resulted in the Waterfront Business Park. This is the concept diagram that emerged later into a subdivision plan. And there's a lot of pieces in here that are important to not time to go through them all, but backdoor industrial truck access to separate it from the waterfront traffic, and pushing the buildings to the street edge and creating a highly desirable pedestrian streetscape environment. Next. That resulted in multiple DDAs and gosh, probably total aggregate of $70 million or so of public and private investment. We focused on that, the streetscape environment. We focused on the compatibility with the waterfront recreation along the water's edge and across from the park, and focused on high quality design and construction and LEED standards. Next. This is really important. It's much too much to get into, but this is we're I guess lucky to have 3 intersection access management plans that were, because we have 3 interchanges, really crucial. There's only one front door ingress and egress route to the waterfront. So traffic is a big deal. The IMP really was driven by ODOT's desire to keep traffic off the interstate and make sure that the throughput on the freeway is not impacted. So effectively what this means is ODOT has kill rights over not only curb cuts, but also the ultimate build out of areas adjacent to their interchange. Next. Commission started looking hard at Lot 1 in 2013. This was just really a preliminary concept plan that enabled us to see what the total build out roughly would be and diagram out what not only would reflect the IMP, but also be reflective of those prior community values. There was a pretty significant community outreach effort in this as part of this. Next. The commission determined to start with the water's edge along the Nichols Basin. There's a lot of reasons behind that, but one is pedestrian connectivity on the trail, but also to really set the easterly edge to Lot 1. Start with the amenities and build off of those. There was boy, I'm going to think about a $500,000 state grant that went into about $250,000 of port funding to implement that project. Next. Here's an important inflection point. This is the waterfront refinement plan. The commission actually contributed funds, half the funds, to get this work done. The intent was to finalize and solidify what the parameters were for development on the waterfront. The refinement plan resulted in changes to the zoning code, set height limits, installed design guidelines, and importantly set out these individual areas, defined areas on the waterfront that had specific allowances that accrued to them. Next. And as I said, the refinement plan and the prior work the commission did is actually implemented in the zoning code. This is important because it reflects the build out plan that the commission had conceived of for lot 1 combined with the water's edge. And it's hard to see here, but it set a northerly limit to where buildings could occur. The urban design concept behind this is to have lower scale buildings on the water side of the adjacent street that scale down to the much more pedestrian scale associated with the waterfront recreation areas. The taller buildings, larger buildings would be then inboard of that adjacent street. But it's hard to see. There is a distance that's defined in the zoning code measured southward from the south edge of the event site in which no buildings can occur, and that effectively brings the park out to the street edge and provides an interface with, in this case, North First. Importantly, it relocated North First and needed to allow for that adjacent edge area for future build out. Next. And there you have the construction of the waterfront trail that was done. Next. The commission went further in 2016 and worked through a much more detailed series of development plans for lot 1. And this is where specific urban design guidelines were agreed to, identified, agreed to, and then demonstrated through this diagrammatic form. There's a lot to talk about here and I won't get into it, but again, you see the push of the buildings to the street edge to increase that, pedestrian streetscape desirability, inboard parking lots so that you don't have parking on the edges. There's something that was affectionately called the swerve, which you can kind of see here, which is a north-south pedestrian bicycle corridor, along with an organizing principle for the stormwater, which is a really critical factor here that runs directly north-south through the site. Next. This is a piece that was a lot of detail here, but the commission commissioned Echo Northwest to do an industrial demand analysis for lot 1 and identified certain, there's limits here that would take a while to get into, but basically there are specific defined industrial uses, which I guess I'd say more like commercial uses. Think of Dakine, where there's an office, primary office user that has either overseas manufacturing or remote manufacturing, so that it's an allowed use in an industrial zone, but it's effectively an office building. Again, think about the Dakine building, or what used to be Dakine. Next. This is the next important piece. The commission commissioned this public infrastructure framework plan. Here, what we're trying to do is drill down really specifically on what's needed in terms of infrastructure to get lot 1 development ready. And there were 2 categories. There was the hard infrastructure, call it, and there was the optional or soft infrastructure, amenities versus have-tos. So the first category would include transportation, road, streets, utilities, that kind of thing. And the soft infrastructure is water access, plazas, and that sort of thing. Next. So there it is, an illustrative view of a full build out future year for lot 1 under that prior development plan and under the refinement plan and under the zoning code approved by the city. Next. So this is an important transition point to where we're getting to here. This rolls up all the different elements in a very simple diagrammatic form. You see the extension of Anchor Way running east-west, connecting 2nd Street over to North First. You see the swerve What you don't see, but we'll talk about later, is a transit center. You see a relocated First Street, and you see then that creates the room along the closer to the Nichols Basin for smaller commercial or retail buildings. There's a limit. It's a 7,000 foot total build out limit for that corridor that's east of North First Street. And then you see some of these other kind of optional amenities that mostly include water access and improving the habitat conditions along the Nichols Basin. And importantly, although much aspirationally, down in the very south, you see a rowing center or a light watercraft center. Next. The commission then engaged with the preliminary subdivision plan process and received preliminary subdivision plan approval. This shows the lot pattern. You can see the easement for the swerve and other aspects. What this though required was full build out of all the infrastructure within a 5-year period, and that was commission determined it was simply not possible. So we effectively let the subdivision plan lapse. Next. So here's where they get into the focus of this discussion. This is an illustrative drawing that shows the focus of our attention has been for the past 6 months or so, which is East Anchor Way and North First Street. So this is just an illustrative, but it shows you the work that the areas where our engineers have been working on. Next. The key considerations the commission's talked about is, of course, we have to conform with the prior planning efforts. The assumption is that these, if they're built, Anchor Way and North First Street would be private streets. So they would not be, at least initially, dedicated, but they would be designed to fulfill every conceivable requirement of the city. And it's possible or likely that they would need to be dedicated in the future. Something to make sure the commission is aware of, this infrastructure is required no matter what the future land use of Lot 1 is. So although it's zoned for light industrial and allows for some variety of uses and a modicum of retail, it doesn't, if this infrastructure doesn't dictate the future land use. And again, it's a lot to get into, but East Anchor Way is effectively a requirement of the IMP. You have to have an alternative egress route for traffic that's coming out of primarily the hotel and the medical office building. We have a lot of funding in hand. We're looking for much more full build out, which it means North First Street would be dependent upon a really significant EDA grant. Next. So here we'll just focus briefly on Anchor Way. So again, this is the internal access route, the primary one for future build out of Lot 1, which is the intersection right in the center. It is a key requirement of the interchange access management plan. If you look at the upper right quadrant, you can see the future transit center. This is a commitment the commission's made over the years to support and augment a more robust transit system in the area. And it's hard to see, but there's a utility corridor that runs about equidistant on the southern half of Lot 1, and that is a legacy from when there used to be, or at least planned to be, a railroad track that ran from the spur line behind HRD due east and connected over to the Nichols Basin, which was a boat building yard in the future. So that utility corridor needs to be relocated to make those southerly lots development ready. And it provided additional street parking. Next. So this is just a quick look. This is the work the commission has already purchased. KPFF is engineer. I'll just run through these quickly just to give you a sense of the work that's already been done. I call this conceptual engineering. It really is more than that because there's a lot of utility connections. You can run through these, Genevieve. There's a lot of utility connections that need to be thought through and finalized in East Anchor Way and North First Street in terms of sewer, in terms of stormwater, electrical, relocation of that utility corridor. and done now so that it anticipates the future development on the north and south halves. Next. So North First Street, we added this, and the commission added a contract amendment with KPFF because of the, call it robust funding that is potentially available, especially through the ARPA funds, but most notably through a significant plus up in funding for the Economic Development Administration. So this is an opportunity that's unlike any I've ever seen to seek significant additional funding for this element of the project. If Anchor Way was done alone, it would connect up to existing First Street. If it's possible to obtain that additional tranche of grant funding from EDA, it's possible to do both of these projects together so that effectively you've consolidated the utilities, you've installed most of the transportation infrastructure, and provided those connections to future water access in one fell swoop. So these are important. The list is here, there's more, but First Street's pretty deteriorated right now, so we'd replace that. Nichols Park, if you can call it that, has a significant expansion at that north end particularly, but also in this at the south end. This is what would allow the commission to have shovel-ready commercial lots along the Nichols edge and be a long way towards shovel-ready for the interior lots. And on-street parking is increased. That's important because the code allows us to utilize on-street parking to park out those small retail commercial buildings on the edge. And the community wanted, and what we would plan for is the possibility of call it a festival street for especially the north half of First Street. Next. So really quickly run through East Anchor Way done alone. We have an estimate of about $1.85 million. We have committed from the, well, it's not yet committed, but we're highly likely to receive a $500,000 from an ODOT Immediate Opportunity Fund. The ARPA grant, this is what Senator Thompson was able to derive. That's $500,000 that we could be allocated to this project or could be split between the commercial hangar. The Transportation Housing Urban Development Appropriation, that's an appropriation that was recommended, shall I say, by both Senators Merkley and Wyden, but that is not certain yet. That has to go through the committee process, and we don't know if their request will make it through that process. And then this would assume that we have a certain tranche of port real estate reserve funds. So this is doable. We're not there in terms of total funding, but if all these fell into place, it'd be, I think, a reasonable allocation from the port's reserve to get Anchor Way done. And one possibility is that there's additional grant for the transit center. There was just a NOFO released today. Next. And this is the same thing with assuming an EDA grant, which is not certain at all, but it would combine both East Anchor Way and North First Street. So this, you can see, if there was a $2.5 million allocation, if we were successful with the EDA grant, then we would need potentially some more reserve funds, or we could seek a higher grant amount from EDA. Next. And this is just a variation, which Genevieve has identified the possibility that we combine this infrastructure work with phase 4 of the city's sewer outfall project, storm sewer outfall project. And that's the one over at the Maritime site connecting up to where they left off on North 8th Street. But there's a possibility here, and all these numbers are just at this point placeholders, where we could potentially have a much greater chance of success with the EDA grant if we combine forces with the city and we could demonstrate completion of that, the final phase of that project along with this infrastructure. So don't take these numbers down. This is simply the first real opportunity to look at possibilities of different grant sources and different amounts of port funding. Next. So I just put down some next steps here for your consideration. Underway is the conceptual engineering and cost estimate for First Street. We're going to get that done in the next few weeks. We need to stay in touch on the THUD appropriations process. I think the outcome of that may be known within the next few weeks. We're already working on the EDA grant application, and we need to decide whether to co-apply with the city. I've asked for final engineering proposals from KPFF for East Anchor Way and for the combined project. So we'll have that in hand, that we can anticipate what the total cost of that would be. We need to work out a concept schedule for the design work, construction of East Anchor Way, and just determine what it might look like in terms of timing, if that were the only project. And we need to submit the EDA grant and wait for a response. All of this, I hope should be done, or we should have enough information end of the year to be able to, for the commission to consider that as part of your FY 22-23 budget process. That is it. And any questions, discussion, or direction is appreciated.
Michael, I've got a question.
Mike, real quick, excuse me. Let me real quickly before we start with questions. I just want to make sure that as part of this discussion, we focus only on infrastructure. As Michael said, getting the infrastructure in is not going to dictate what we do in the future. So if we can focus our questions only on the infrastructure itself, that would be helpful, I think, for tonight for staff. So please go right ahead.
Okay. So Michael, could you put up that little diagram you just had on lot 1?
Which one?
The big picture of lot 1. Yeah, that's good. So what you're talking about here is a couple of roads being realigned and adding one east-west. Talk to me a little bit about the routing and the stubbing of the utilities that are included. Are you? Yeah.
Oh. Well, let me try to answer that. The one aspect is if you look down at what we call lot 5 across 2nd Street, at the south edge of that, right there, there's existing utilities that cut right through across over to First Street. So this part of this would be to relocate those, put them in the streetscape, and get them out of that lower area, which is a real problem for any future build out there. The stormwater system is designed to, and has already been characterized so that it's effectively on-site disposition of stormwater. There is a stormwater outfall that's over in the Nichols Basin, and when we would use that as outflow or overflow. But this street and that the connections that run north-south at the intersection of Anchor Way anticipate that future stormwater collection and conveyance system.
So would you run a stormwater line underneath that new road and have it just stub out in each of these sections above and below Anchor Way?
Well, there's a lot of technical detail to get into, but the streetscape there is designed to essentially be a stormwater conveyance and recharge system. So this is a green street. It has, if you zoomed in close, you could see a lot of that stormwater recharge areas along the street edge. So the idea is for the street, the stormwater that's generated from the street, it actually flows into those adjacent collection systems and is dissipated. So it's only in a 500-year storm event or so that overflow would then take it into the line out to the Nichols Basin.
Okay, where I'm really going with this, Michael, is like your electrical and water and sewer going to each of these areas above and below Anchor Way. Is the plan to bring it into the general area and just stub it out? So when the decision is made, what's actually going in there, then we'll continue routing to whatever that thing looks like? Or are you trying to do all of the undergrounds now in anticipation of what it's going to be used for.
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, it's a stub out situation. So we need to anticipate how to accommodate wastewater, stormwater from the north and south parts of lot 1. We also have to anticipate accommodation of same for the smaller, the retail lots. So this is the organizing structure for the future utility system, but it only stubs it out at the back of sidewalk.
Okay, now how about electrical?
Same with that.
So electrical, you're bringing in service to that north and south area, but it's basically a utility cave or something there. And then you'll connect to it later on through conduits and whatever else you decide to do. So all you're doing is basically you're putting in stub ups.
Exactly right.
Okay, I'm fine. And that's what your price is based on, is stub ups.
That's right.
Okay.
This is a highly conceptualized diagram, but it shows the variety of utilities and how they'd be organized.
Where's your power? Okay, red is power.
So this is partly an update, partly a backgrounder for new commissioners, but we wanted to make sure that the commission saw where we were and saw where we're going, and that you felt this is the direction to keep going in. Okay, I saw a thumbs up from Commissioner Chapman, Commissioner Fox, Commissioner Strike, and Commissioner Shepherd. Commissioner Gearing, do you have?
I'm giving you a thumbs up too. Am I off the grid?
You're off the screen. Okay, so we'll
Unanimous, Michael.
go ahead. No, that's good. Great, thank you. We got direction. We're keep moving.
Perfect. We're gonna move along to executive director report. I know you have a few things to say. During this report is when I'm gonna step out of the meeting and Commissioner Chapman's gonna take it the rest of the way. Before we get to the bi-state working group chat. So thanks for all your hard work this week, staff. I appreciate it.
So Ben, are you going to be around for the next 2 minutes?
I will be, yes.
Okay. I'll go quick through this. Senator Merkley's coming on Friday, 12:25. You'll have about 50 minutes here. So we're going to have the bi-state working group to get together and spend about 20 minutes with the senator, and then we'll take him out on the bridge and visit the lift stand control booth. President Shepherd, I've given you a little bit of information about that, but there's not a lengthy itinerary. It's just Senator Merkley's here, 12:25 Friday. We'll meet out here. They want to meet outside, so we'll meet out by the point. Some or most of the bi-state working group will be there, and like I said, he's got 20 minutes to hear from people. I think one of the things I want to express to him is our thanks. He was instrumental in achieving the build grant success that we had. And I know that to be a fact. And I think that's something that we should all be thankful for and express that when we're here. There's a draft agenda for the fall planning meeting, I tell you what we will do is I prepared an early draft. We had a discussion with staff meeting today. After the meeting, we'll send that out to the commission. I had hoped to have that you could look at as part of the packet, but this is an important point for the commission to look in on, at least what staff is thinking are the key topics for discussion of fall planning. But we want to know that that's reflects what the commission wants to talk about. So we'll send that out via email. Appreciate any additions, changes, modifications, and then we'll finalize that with the commission at the October 5th meeting. The fall planning was scheduled tentatively for October 19th. I'd like to see if the commissioners are available to reschedule that for November 5th. We typically have our fall planning in November. This one we moved up to October, but just based on a variety of schedule constraints, it looks like it would be optimal to have that on the 5th of November. And remember, that's a 4, sometimes 5-hour meeting. We'll start at noon. Well, it'll be Zoom again, but we'll work through the afternoon and work through this agenda. And the idea is to have a discussion and get feedback. We won't give you a lot of paperwork to review. It's more a time where we could all look at an item, have some information to base a discussion on, and then just hear from commissioners. So I'd appreciate feedback on whether that 5th works. And then it doesn't have to be right now, but we'll finalize that. We'll get the agenda, draft agenda out for you to look at. PNWA annual meetings, October 19th and 21st. It's at the Convention Center Hotel in Vancouver this year. This is something that typically commissioners go to. Some commissioners, typically there's 1 or 2 that go. So you don't have to answer me now, but if you're available and interested in going, it's about a 3-year conference, 3-day conference. And that frankly was one of the challenges of fall planning, because it starts on the 19th. What we'll do is send you the agenda. We'll send you the hotel location, all that. And if you could decide, commissioners, if you are interested and available, then we'll make reservations and get you lined up for that. I wanted to ask a specific question. I'm sorry, I'm getting into the sun here. There was a drowning on the waterfront this summer, as you know. One idea that we've talked about is bringing together some of the first responders, bring together Parks and Recreation, the city, and others, and have a work session and just talk about waterfront safety, talk about emergency response, make sure that everyone's on the same page and we're hearing any ideas that anyone has relative to waterfront safety. We can do that different ways. Instead of a work session, it can be individual. I can reach out to individuals, get their input, and kind of aggregate it together and then reflect it back. I wanted to know if the commission felt that a work session like that would be something you want to pursue, or if you'd rather just have staff make individual contacts and get feedback from a variety of parties.
This is Commissioner Chapman. As much as I am not a fan of meetings, I do think sometimes work sessions get some good brainstorming going where people can ping off of each other more so than just one-on-one feedback. So I wouldn't be opposed. It's a big concern for everyone.
Yeah, Mike, Commissioner Strike, when you're dealing with safety, I think it's best to have a work session and have each entity have their own representation so that you interpret it what it is that they represent themselves and get a good understanding where they're coming from.
Okay.
I think that's a good idea.
I'm fine with it as well.
Commissioner Garing, are you okay? Okay. I wanted to say there's been a lot of waterfront activities at the end of the summer here, and Daryl's done a tremendous job. We had a variety of other things to brief the commission on or let you know about. That there was a glitch and didn't make it into my report. But just so you know, the launch land is back at the event site. That transition happened. Thank you. The AWSI event was a good success, and thanks for Daryl for working with that group to get it into the fall after the primary activity season. And then Harvest Fest was often iffy, but it appears as though that is going to be on this year. The event organizers have been working with the county health department. So at this point, I believe that Harvest Fest will occur. I think I already mentioned it, but FBO wanted me to extend an invitation to each commissioner to come out and visit the airfield, look at their operation. They actually would like to have some discussion and let the commission know or commissioners know about some ideas they have relative to the airfield. And so I would ask any commissioner that's interested and willing to do that to let me know, and we'll arrange a meeting up there. And finally, a lot of capital maintenance projects coming on the bridge. This is going to be a really challenging fall. I have a list in my report, but I didn't mention and should have the live load testing. we're trying to get that work plan dialed in, and that's going to require episodes of flagging and significant assistance from port staff. And then depending on what you decide later, there's the pier cap and the underwater dive inspection of the water piers. So that's pending, but a lot of action. John is on top of it, but we're gonna have to really line this out so that we schedule things properly, and we always have a concern about harvest in the summer fall. That's my
Hey,
report.
Michael, I've got
Yes, sir.
just a kind of a question, comment on the evaluation of the piers, where you're going to send underwater folks take a look at it. There was some concern about ghost fishing nets wrapped around a couple of the piers.
Right.
And I know this is very, very sensitive, but with that in mind, does it make sense to build a little study that basically says, here's what it costs us to remove those nets? And to me, we ought to back charge the tribal nations for that. There ought to be some kind of regulation that you just can't let that stuff float free. And I know that's going to be near impossible to do, but we are going to be negotiating with the tribes for access on that side of the river for the new bridge. And I think if we had a couple of cases where we've done some things for you that you cause problems, it would help in that negotiation to try and balance it out.
Yeah, absolutely, we can do that. It'll depend on the diver's decision whether they can remove the nets, and they haven't been able to access some of those piers because of the nets in the past. But assuming the divers think it's okay, or determine it's okay, then we'll remove those. They'll remove those, and we will determine how much time it took and the associated cost. So we'll have that.
Okay, thank
Good
you.
suggestion. Okay, anything else on my report? All right.
Okay, so Ben had to step off, so apparently I am now in charge. So with that being said, Commissioner and Committee reports, bridge replacement by state working group. Commissioner Fox, do you want to take that?
Sure. We actually had a working session on the estimate this last week. And if you remember, we brought to the commission last time authorization to go ahead and proceed with the estimate. And it's done in 3 phases. Phase 1 is to define the scope. Phase 2 is to estimate it. Phase 3 is to integrate it with a schedule. So we're in pieces of phase 1 right now, which is defining the scope down in some detail. I'm not going to get into everything that we talked about, but there's a couple of key things that the port needs to be aware of. And again, this is for the estimate only. Reality may change things, but we're trying to get the scope of this thing encompassed. What we found as we went through the details on the Oregon side, the way that bridge is coming in, as we talked in more detail, it's highly unlikely that the port building and maintenance shed is going to be able to stay where it is. And when we expand that discussion a little bit about construction laydown areas that we're going to have, it makes a whole lot of sense to relocate the port building, the close off the existing parking lot for the boat ramp, and use that whole area there for laydown, including 2 areas that wrap around the road in front of the Department of Vehicles. There's a couple of open spaces there. That makes the most sense for laydown area. And as we talk through the issues, we decided for the estimate to make that assumption. Now, as we go forward, we're going to have to confirm that, and then we're going to have to decide what we're going to do. But for developing of the estimate, unless we have some real problems, that's what's going in the basic assumption of the estimate. There's a second piece to this on the Washington side, based on the conceptual design, and I think NEPA, the access to the new bridge is through a roundabout and not a stoplight. Now, when we looked at the details of that roundabout, that causes some big money to be spent pushing that hillside back. We're going to have to excavate into the hillside to create a lane to get 2 lanes going around the roundabout. And there's an area concern that I've got is with that, I think it's a natural gas pumping station on the other side. We're going to be kissing right up to it real close. So there's going to have to be some kind of a structured wall there to protect that from a truck impeding on it. So I think we make the assumption that's what we're going to do. But as we go forward, I think there's an area that we need to take another look at through design and maybe go back to a T intersection with a light where you don't have to expand into that hillside. It's going to be very costly. So those are the 2 main areas that we're looking at. The third area, we looked briefly at how are we going to raise the bridge structure into place. And it looks like the assumption is going to be, it's going to be a slip form moving from the Oregon side to the Washington side after we get the piers built. So it's not going to be a bridge launcher with precast members. It's going to be slip formed, poured in place, just because we don't have the room to maneuver. Again, those are the 3 or 4 big things that we talked about. And as we continue on, we'll keep you abreast of what's going on there. But word of caution, it looks like we need to be thinking about over the next year, the office building and what are we going to do with that? End of report.
Thank you, Commissioner Fox. And actually, you bring up a good point. I noticed that there was a lot of construction work happening on the Washington side the other day when I had to drive over there with that Northwest Natural pumping station because of the gentleman that ran into it last winter, which was a lot of fun for everyone. So is Michael or John, are you guys in touch with Northwest Natural to be talking to them about those issues? Just out of curiosity.
John, can you answer that?
We really didn't have much to do with that. The natural gas company kind of gets to do what they want. They're very similar to the railroad when it comes to, they have the easements in place. That's their property to use and do as they want, and they don't really ask. So.
Okay, I just was wondering if we were having a conversation like, here's what we're looking at in the future and maybe, but that's another conversation. But okay, good to know. Does anyone have any questions for Commissioner Fox? If not, we'll move on to the Airport Advisory Committee. Commissioner Strike or Gehring?
Christy, I wasn't able to be there, so it might be Michael because I believe Heather was not able to either.
I'm happy to field that.
Great, go ahead, Greg.
So Airport Advisory Committee met on September 16th. Our airport engineering consultant team, Precision Approach Engineering, representatives from such were there, Tracy May and Matt Mass. They were introduced to the group and they gave us the purview of explaining some of the general funding limitations and scheduling for FAA, or I should say for FAA funding, kind of provide that framework so people could understand how projects move through that system and get funded appropriately. They discussed some of the initial projects they're looking to acquire funding for as we move forward. Aviation technology, which we discussed earlier, and the result of that was the recommendation that we previously stated. Ground leases, that conversation was entered into again, renewed, and ultimately the hope is to develop a recommendation for the next commissioner meeting that would include a ground lease exhibit, if you will, that would help to illustrate how a proper lease could protect and provide more control for the port through the lease of the life of the lease. The terms, right of first offer, building maintenance, upkeep, reversionary clauses, things along those lines. So I would look for that at the next commissioner meeting. And then ordinance 23 was discussed and how best it would adhere, how best to adhere to it, if you will, with regard to the alternative grass landing area, and just notionally coming up with solutions on how the pilot community could be better informed with regard to those subjects. Other than that, the next AC meeting was scheduled for October 21st, and that concludes my brief.
Demute myself. Okay, so now we're on to action items. It looks like we're Michael, HDR Engineering.
Yeah, just one action item tonight. This is pretty self-explanatory. We have, of course, our structure critical inspections every 2 years. We have the underwater inspections every 2 years. What our engineer is recommending, and it's in our capital maintenance plan and in your budget, to carry out these additional inspections for the pier caps and the underwater dive inspections of the water piers. So there's a couple of additional conditions. We talked about the ghost nuts, and then there's a little bit of potholing that the engineer is recommending about, gosh, what is it, Pier 6 or Pier 8? So assuming the conditions are right, they'll do a little potholing and see the condition just below the mud line along that pier. And then if they run into ghost nuts, we talked about that. They're if they feel it's safe, we'll remove those get those out of the water if we can, and bring them to shore. So this is a recommendation to approve this task order. They will, if the commission approves this, they'll literally get going in the next few days on scheduling the inspections.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I forgot what it said. What's the time frame on this?
The intent is to get the inspections done within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Again, it depends on the dive team schedule and such. And then after that, it would probably be another month or so to have the engineers report back.
And how does this tie in, or does it at all, with the load study?
It does not tie in at all.
Unless there's something major that you find.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If that were the case, sure. But correct, that's right.
Okay, not hearing any other discussion. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve task order 12 to the master services agreement with HDR Engineering Inc. for bridge pier inspection services not to exceed $81,305 plus reasonable reimbursable expenses.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Strike will second that. And Strike second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye, Fox.
Garing, aye.
Commissioner Strike?
I already said aye, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay, then Chapman, aye. Motion passes. Okay, and then moving on to confirmation of commission directives to staff.
Okay, hello, commissioners. Let me jump in on that. So the first thing I had was Commissioner Fox asked Michael to be sure to reach out to the FBO to help with the monitoring. And Michael said he would do that, so I'll add that in. And that he had also asked, all commissioners asked that we fine tune it and take it back to the AAC. So does that sound like what we have going there? Everybody agree with that? Anything else? Okay. The next thing I heard was that Michael could move forward to schedule the waterfront safety work session. So we're going to do that. That's the rough rule. Does that sound right? Okay, all good with that. And the other one that I had heard was with the evaluation of the peers, Commissioner Fox asked that Michael be sure to have the cost estimate with the study for removing the ghost nets for future uses. And Michael said that, yes, he will definitely have that. So those were the directives I heard. That's it.
Thanks, Daryl. Okay, if there's nothing else, can I get a commission call? Let's start with Commissioner Strike.
Thanks, Commissioner Chapman. I just have a couple things. The UR update, I believe it's Heather and yourself are UR representatives. Is that correct? Because on the breakdown, it showed I was still a UR representative.
No, I think it's supposed to be Heather and myself, so we need to get that correct.
That's correct. Okay, great. And then also too, this one thing I talked about last year too. I personally would like to see anything that is associated with the executive director's wages, contracts. I'd like to have that pulled out of a consent agenda and make it a line item for an action item. So it's total transparency. It doesn't get combined into a bunch of agenda consent items. That's a personal opinion, but I've talked about it before, but there's good transparency when we talk about the EDs, the contract.
I think that seems fair. If anyone has objection to that, then we'll go ahead and have that be a future thing.
I just have a clarifying question. I'm sorry, Ben's not here to answer it. Ben's direction to staff was when something had was a recommendation from advisory committee. And if the advisory committee had reviewed the issue and made the recommendation that that Ben wanted it on consent, do we want to make this the one exception to that rule, or do we want to revisit that rule? Oh, you're muted, Hobie.
You're muted.
I'd like to revisit it because like I said, I just think for transparency, I think that should be an action that should be standalone by itself so that the constituents never fear that we're trying to sneak something through or cover something up. And that's my personal opinion.
Okay,
So Genevieve, I think that direction is, that's the exception.
got it. Thank you.
Well, Genevieve, I think what Commissioner Shepherd said was that he wanted it on consent, but then that allowed the board to pull it from consent down to action. But if it goes through committee, put it on consent, and if the board wants to pull it, they can pull it. That was my understanding.
And we have that opportunity for it to pull anything we want. The commissioner can pull anything out of consent. I'm just saying from a perspective standpoint, from the consumer and the constituents, it just looks like, my personal opinion, when I was president, I wanted it to have a separate line item to stand out and stand by itself. That's what I'm asking this for the discussion to talk about.
I'll jump in. If we leave it on the consent, more than likely, we're going to pull it out at the meeting. So why don't we just pull it out to start with? As an exception.
Okay.
Yeah, so just for procedure, so the elected president of the board usually sets the agenda. So I'll make sure that Ben, since he's not here, that he knows that that was your request, because it's at Ben's direction that was put on consent. So we'll make sure that he understands that this is an exception to that one.
Okay. Commissioner Fox, you're on unmute, so go for it. Do you have anything?
We're working through on the revised bridge through the Bi-State Working Group, the contract language on the replacement bridge management contract. We've hit one little bump and we're working through it. And the bump is, how do you use cost in the evaluation? And we've got Oregon, we got Washington, we got the feds involved in it, and we'll figure it out. But that's kind of what's going on right now there.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Garing, do you have anything?
No, I regrettably was out of town for the AAC meeting, but I did make it to the fly-in and thought they did a spectacular job. It was amazing.
Yeah, that was a fun weekend. Okay, so barring no further discussion, I will go ahead and adjourn our regular session. I'll give Genevieve a few minutes to cease the live stream, and then we will enter
Christie, excuse me, it's recess the regular, not adjourn.
recess the regular session, and then we will enter into executive session under ORS 192.6602H to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed.
And so that's actually the wrong one.
Oh, it is? Well, then I don't know what we're doing.
There we go. If you can read this, the screen as the corrected citation.
Oh, thank you, thank you. So please scratch that earlier remark, and that we will be entering executive session under ORS 192.6602F to consider information exempt by law from public inspection.